Section 11, page 43. In the middle of the room she paused, looking about her with a grave mouth and smiling eyes, and in that instant Newland Archer rejected the general verdict on her looks. It was true that her early radiance was gone. The red cheeks had paled. She was thin, worn, a little older looking than her age, which must have been nearly 30. But there was about her the mysterious authority of beauty, a sureness in the carriage of the head, the movement of the eyes, which, without being in the least theatrical, struck his as highly trained and full of conscious power. At the same time she was simpler in manner than most of the ladies present, and many people, in parentheses, as he heard afterward from Janey, were disappointed that her appearance was not more stylish, for stylishness was what New York most valued. It was perhaps, Archer reflected, because her early vivacity had disappeared, because she was so quiet in her movements, her voice, and the tones of her low-pitched voice. New York had expected something a good deal more resonant in a young woman with such a history. The dinner was somewhat formidable business. Dining with the van der Luydens was at best no light matter, and dining there with a duke who was their cousin was almost a religious solemnity. It pleased Archer to think that only an old New Yorker could perceive that shade of difference, in parentheses, to New York, between being merely a duke and being the van der Luydens' duke. New York took stray noblemen calmly, and even, in parentheses, except in the starter set, with a certain distrustful hauteur. But when they presented such credentials as these were they received with an old-fashioned cordiality that they would have been greatly mistaken in ascribing solely to their standing in the breath. It was for just such distinctions that the young man cherished his old New York, even while he smiled at it. The van der Luydens had done their best to emphasize the importance of the occasion. The De la Civès and the Trevana George, too, played were out, so the van der Luyden, Lowestoft, in parentheses, East India Company, and the Dagonet Crown Derby, Mrs. van der Luyden looked more than ever like a cabanel, and Mrs. Archer, in her grandmother's seed pearls and emeralds, reminded her son of an Isabey miniature. All the ladies had on their handsome jewels, but it was characteristic of the house and the occasion that these were mostly in rather heavy old-fashioned settings, and old Mrs. Lennings, who had been persuaded to come, actually wore her mother's cameos and a Spanish blonde shawl. The Countess Olenska was the only young woman at the dinner, yet, as Archer skinned the smooth, plump, elderly faces between their diamond necklaces and towering ostrich feathers, they struck him as curiously immature compared with hers. It frightened him to think what must have gone to the making of her eyes. The Duke of St. Austrie, who sat at his hostess' right, was naturally the chief figure in the evening, but if the Countess Olenska was less conscious than he had been hoped, the Duke was almost invisible. Being a well-bred man, he had not, in parentheses, like another recent ducal visitor, come to the dinner in a shooting jacket. But his evening clothes were so shabby and baggy, and he wore them with such an air of their being homespun that, in parentheses, with his stooping way of sitting and the vast breadth spreading over his short front, he hardly gave the appearance of being in dinner attire. He was short, round-shouldered, sunburned, with a thick nose, small eyes, and a sociable smile, but he seldom spoke, and when he did, it was in such low tones that, despite the frequent silence of expectations about the table, his remarks were lost to all but his neighbors. When the man joined the ladies after dinner, the Duke went straight up to the Countess Olenska and they sat down in a corner and plunged into animated talk. Neither seemed aware that the Duke should first have paid his respects to Mrs. Lovell Mingott and Mrs. Hadley Shivers, and the contents have conversed with that amiable hypochondriac, Mr. Urban Dagonet of Washington Square, who, in order to have the pleasure of meeting her, had broken through his fixed rule of not dining or between January and April. The two chatted together for nearly 20 minutes. Then the Countess rose and, walking along across the white drawing room, sat down at Newland Archer's side. It wasn't the custom in New York drawing rooms for a lady to get up and walk away from one gentleman in order to seek the company of another. Etiquette required that she should wait, immovable as an idol, while the men who wished to converse her succeeded each other at her side. But the Countess was apparently unaware of having broken any rule. She sat at perfect ease in a corner of the sofa beside Archer, and looked at him with the kindest eyes. "I want you to talk me about May," he said. Instead of answering her, he asked, "You knew the Duke before?" "Oh yes, we used to see him every winter at Nice. He is very fond of gambling. He used to come to the house a great deal." She said it in the simplest manner, as if she had said, "He is fond of wild flowers." And after a moment she added candidly, "I think he is the dullest man I ever met." This pleased her companion so much that he forgot the slight shock her previous remark had caused him. It was undeniably exciting to meet a lady who found the Van der Luydens Duke dull, and dared to utter the opinion. He longed to question her, to hear more about the life of which her careless words had given him so illuminating a glimpse, but he feared to touch on distressing memories, and before he could think of anything to say, she had strayed back to her original subject. "May is a darling. I have seen no young girl in New York so handsome and so intelligent. Are you very much in love with her?" Newland Archer reddened and laughed, as much as a man can be. She continued to consider him thoughtfully, as if not to miss any shade of meaning in what he said. "Do you think, then, there is a limit to being in love? If there is, I haven't found it." She glowed with sympathy. "Oh, it's really and truly a romance. The most romantic of romances. How delightful! And you found it all out for yourselves. It was not in the least arranged for you." Archer looked at her incredulously. "Have you forgotten," he asked, with a smile, "that in our country we don't allow our marriages to be arranged for us?" A dusky blush rose to her cheek, and he instantly regretted his words. "Yes," she answered, "I had forgotten. You must forgive me if I sometimes make these mistakes. I don't always remember that everything here is good that was bad where I come from." She looked down at her Venus fan of eagle feathers, and he saw that her lips trembled. "I'm so sorry," he said impulsively, "but you are among friends here, you know." "Yes, I know. Wherever I go, I have that feeling. That's why I came home. I want to forget everything else, to become a complete American again, like the Mingotts and Vallants, and you and your delightful mother, and all the other good people here tonight. Ah, here is May arriving, and you will want to hurry up away to her," she added, but without moving, and her eyes turned back from the door to rest on the young man's face. The drawing rooms were beginning to fill up with after-dinner guests, and following Madame Olenska's glance, Archer saw May Welland entering with her mother. In her dress of a white and silver, with a wreath of silver blossoms in her hair, the tall girl looked like a Diana, just alight from the chase. "Oh," said Archer, I have so many rivals. You see, she is already surrounded. There is the Duke being introduced. Then stay with me a little longer, Madame Olenska said, in a low tone, just touching his knee with her plumed fan. It was the lightest touch, but it thrilled him like a caress. Yes, let me stay, he answered in the same tone, hardly knowing what he said. But just then Mr. van der Luyden came up, followed by old Mr. Urban Dagonet. The Countess greeted them with her grave smile, and Arthur, feeling his host's admonitory glance on him, rose and surrendered his seat. Madame Olenska held out her hand as if to bid him goodbye. Tomorrow, then, after 5, I shall expect you, she said, and then turned back to make room for Mr. Dagonet. Tomorrow, Arthur heard himself repeating, though there had been no engagement, and during their talk she had given him no hint that she wished to see him again. As she moved away, he saw Lawrence Lefferts, tall and resplendent, leading his wife up to be introduced, and heard Gertrude Lefferts say, as she beamed on the Countess with her large unperceiving smile, "But I think we used to go to dancing school together when we were children." Behind her, waiting their turn to name themselves to the Countess, Arthur noticed a number of the recalcitrant couples who had declined to meet her at Mrs. Lovell Mingott's. As Mrs. Arthur remarked, when the van der Luydens chose, they knew how to give a lesson. The wonder was that they chose so seldom. The young man felt a touch on his arm and saw Mrs. van der Luyden looking down on him from the pure eminence of black velvet and the family diamonds. "It was good of you, dear Newland, to devote yourself so unselfishly to Madame Olenska. I told your cousin Henry he must really come to the rescue." He was aware of smiling at her vaguely, and she added, as if condescending to his natural shyness, "I've never seen May looking lovelier. The Duke thinks her the handsomest girl in the room." End of the section, page 47.